As usual, this is Al from BluFo Innovations, and welcome to our final video on CSS. Now at this point, you may be feeling a little overwhelmed or confused. You may be thinking, wow, this is more challenging than the first section on HTML. And that's fine. CSS can be a little challenging at first. But the only way to become efficient with CSS is to use it, put it into practice. You'll make some mistakes, you'll figure out how to correct those mistakes, you'll learn new techniques, and over time, CSS will get much more easy and you'll get more efficient. CSS is not difficult, but it does require practice. So what I've tried to do in these videos is just give an overhead view. I've tried to show you how CSS works, some different techniques you can use for getting elements, some different ways of positioning and styling elements. But to get efficient, to progress from here, that's on you. You've got to continue to use these things and learn on your own. So in this video, we're going to finish styling our web page, and we're going to focus on a very important concept, which is responsive design. Well, what is responsive design? I'll give you a brief history. In the early days of the internet, almost everybody using the internet was using small desktop computers. In fact, a long time ago, the very first website I built, it was standard to build websites for screens that were only 800 by 600 pixels. Really small, right? However, since then, screens have grown bigger, and now we use websites on desktops, laptops, tablets, smartphones, and more. And a really good website has to be able to look good on all different screen sizes. That's where responsive design comes in. Your website has to be willing to respond to the screen that it's on so it can look good on any screen, big or small. Now, as we've been building our first website, I deliberately have made some elements non-responsive so we could see what this looks like. Our web page may look pretty good on a desktop screen, but what will it look like on a smaller screen? A good tool for figuring that out is by using the developer tools we discussed in the last video. So I'm going to open my developer tools, and then I'm going to click on this button down here. It looks kind of like a laptop and a cell phone, and this comes up. It's going to show me what my website looks like on a wide screen, but now I can drag this in and make it smaller and smaller. It still looks pretty good, but as I start to get really small, things move out of place, right? Your titles drop down here. Now these lists are pushed all the way to the left edge. Your footer looks like a complete mess, and we still can go smaller. Smaller. Things look really ugly now. And beyond that, you can click this button up here and choose an actual device to see what your page would look like on that device. So I have a Pixel 7 phone. If I click on that, yikes, the website does not look really good. So a well-designed website is going to be responsive, which means it's going to look really good when the web page is on a screen this size, all the way up to a screen this size. That's our goal. We're not there yet, but let's start working on it. So I'm going to close out of my developer tools, and let's think about how to make our header more responsive. If you remember from the earlier video, we created a div to hold these titles and floated it to the right. Now, I usually wouldn't use that method because with float, sometimes you get the behavior we already saw where things get pushed together and items float out of place. But it's actually going to work in this instance because another thing we want to keep in mind is that on a big screen, you have all of this room. Again, you want to take up some negative space, but on a smaller screen, you're going to have a lot less space. So what I want to do is make it so that these titles show up on a larger screen, but on a smaller screen, they go away. They're just not necessary. So let's do that. We're going to go into our CSS file, and we'll use something new. It's called the media rule. So it's an @ media. And between these parentheses, we have to give it a property. So I'm going to say max width 900 pixels. And what this is going to allow us to do is give our page a second set of style rules, except these rules are only going to be applied if the page is less than 900 pixels wide. If it's more than 900 pixels, these rules will be ignored. And I said that on a smaller screen, I just want to get rid of those titles in the header. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say header div, that's selecting the div that's inside the header. And very simply, I'm going to say display none, which of course means it just won't display it. And now if we look at our page, nothing's changed. But that's because I'm on a larger screen. This screen is much wider than 900 pixels. So our div with our titles is still shown. But what would it look like on a smaller screen? Well, let's open up our developer tools. And here you can see I'm up to 2471 pixels, but let's bring this in. We'll bring this in. And as we get close to 900, there, 900, it disappears. Do you see that? No div, div, no div, div. Great, so that works, but on a smaller screen, things look pretty imbalanced now. So what I want to do is try to align these items here so everything's in the center of our page. And that's pretty easy as well. Let's go back to our CSS page and let's add a couple more properties. I want to add a property to center things in the middle of our header. So I'm going to select the header and just say text align center. We'll see what that looks like. And it did center things in the middle of our header, but I want to have these stacked on top of each other. I don't want them in line anymore. So I'm going to add one more property, and I'm just going to select our nav bar, nav, and say display block. This will put the nav bar on its own line. So now when they're centered, it's going to look a lot better. You're going to have your logo and your nav bar centered, and those titles aren't displayed anymore. So this looks much better on a small screen. But again, if we go to a larger screen above 900 pixels, it'll go back to our old layout, which looks better on a larger screen. So large screen, small screen, large screen, small screen. And just like that, we made our header much more responsive, and I think it looks a lot better. So let's begin working on our main section now. Now, I don't want to make too many changes to our main section. Theoretically, I could go align all of these to the middle of the page. But when I have lists like this, I think having them justified to the left side of the page looks okay. But what I want to do is add a little bit of spacing here so these aren't pushed right up to the edge of the page. To do that, I'm going to go back in here and just make a small change. If we remember, our sections are inside a container that's in the center of the page, but I want to add a little padding here. So I'm just going to say padding left 20 pixels, and we'll say padding right 20 pixels to put some padding in our container. And now if we save it and take a look, things look a lot better. It's going to apply that padding on large and small screens, but things look a lot more well spaced out now, and these seem a little bit more in line with our logo and footer. I think that's a really good and useful solution. So we're getting pretty close. Now we just want to make our footer look better. To do that, I'm going to modify something we've already done. Remember, we created a column class for each of these three footer components. I want to change that. So let's go find our column class, which is right here, and I'm going to delete these two properties and put in two new properties. I'm going to say text align center. That's to center the contents of each of those columns. And then we're going to add some padding to the top, just 20 pixels, and we'll add padding bottom 20 pixels as well, just to space things out a little bit more. And if we take a look at it, now these components are stacked on top of each other. And that's because we don't have that inline block statement. But it's okay, we're going to put these items in line using a different method, and that's by using a flexbox, which we haven't seen yet. But flexbox is a really useful CSS tool for aligning and positioning elements. So to do that, we're going to go in our HTML file, and we're going to find this div here, which contains our three columns. And I'm going to give it an ID because this is what we want to turn into our flexbox. I'm going to call this footer items. And then in our CSS, we'll target that ID. And I'm going to put mine above the media rule just to keep things organized. But we'll call this footer items. And I'm going to add a few properties here. I'm going to say display flex, makes it a flex box. Then we're going to say flex wrap. And what that will do is if the elements can't fit horizontally in that flex box, it'll just wrap them down to the next line. You'll see that in action in a moment. And then a couple more properties. I'm going to say justify content space evenly, and that's going to space the contents of that flex box evenly. And the last one is just going to be align items center, and that's going to align the items vertically in the center of the flex box. And again, you'll see that in just a moment. Now, I'm going to save that, and let's take a look at our page. And there we go. The items are in line again, but this time, instead of using the inline block property, we used the flex box. So it looks good on small pages, on large pages, but if we get too small, again, things are getting really squished here. So we still have to make this a bit more responsive. Let's take a look at how to do that. Well, our column class is set up so each of these components takes up a third the width of the page, regardless of the size of the screen. Well, let's change that. So let's go back into our media rule, and now let's override that column class. So let's say column, and I'm going to say width 50%. And again, this is at the 900 pixel marker. So if we're looking at this, and I bring it in here, once we get to 900 pixels, the width of each of these columns changes to 50%. So now you have 50% here, 50% here, And then this gets wrapped or pushed down to the next line, and it's only 50% wide here. So again, if we go to a wider screen, 33% wide, smaller screen, 50% wide. That looks a lot better. But what if we go smaller, smaller? Well, once you get really small, things get kind of cramped again. So let's create another rule. I'm going to go in here, and let's add another media rule. So again, I'm going to say at media. In this property, I'm going to say a max width of 600 pixels. So it'll only apply this style to an even smaller screen. And I'm going to say column width is 100%. So that's going to take up 100% of the width of our Flexbox. And now if we take a look at it, it still looks the same because we're at about 790 pixels wide. But as I get smaller and smaller, below 600, there, it goes to 100% width. So here you have 100% width of the Flexbox. Above 600 pixels, it goes to 50%. And then once we get above 900 pixels, it goes to 33%. Pretty cool, right? Now I know at these smaller sizes, our list looks a little weird. Let's just fix that real quickly. To do that, we're just going to add a property. And it's always good practice when you're working with CSS to try and keep your style sheets organized. So I'm going to actually scroll to the top here where we styled our list items. And above that, I'm going to style our unordered list, our UL element. And I'm just going to say display inline block. And that's going to make those lists look a lot better. There we go. So again, we have everything looking nice and tidy on a small screen. We are on a very small screen. We have 100% width, little bit larger screen, 50% width, larger screen, 33% width, and things are looking much closer to be done. And that gives you a pretty good idea how to make your website more responsive. Now there's a couple things I want to show you just real quick to try and make this website feel more complete, and then we will have finished our section on CSS. Let's close out of our developer tools. And the first thing I want to show you is the hover selector. So we have buttons on our page, right? We have our nav bar, for example, and I can move my mouse over these, but it doesn't really seem like they're buttons because they don't change or do anything. That's where the hover selector comes in. So I'm going to go into our CSS file here, and we're going to add some new style, and I'm going to put it somewhere near the top of the page because it's for all of our links. And what I'm going to say is a:hover. That's the hover selector. And then I'm going to put a color here, and we'll give it our nice pink color. And now if we go back to our page, when I hover over these links, you'll see they change color. That one small change makes a huge difference, right? Now you can tell these are buttons and they're very clickable items. And since we applied it to all of the links on our page, it works down in this nav bar as well. So these change from white to pink as well. Pretty cool. Now, I was going to try to put a couple of finishing touches on this website, but this video is already pretty long. So why don't we come back and do one more short video where I'll show you how to change out these links for actual social media icons. And then I'm going to show you how to do something that you may have been wondering about for quite some time, and that's how to add more pages to your website. Although there are tons of websites out there that are only one page, it's much more common to see multiple page websites. So we're going to do that in the next video. I'll see you over there.